On December 31st, 1963, legendary singer and songwriter Bob Dylan appeared at a swanky hotel in New York City to accept an award. But instead of leaving the event feeling honored, Dylan fled in a state of shock. The audience that came to applaud him wound up booing, all because of some comments that Dylan made about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which had taken place in the previous month. About a year after that painful evening, Dylan revealed to the famous music journalist Nat Hentoff how traumatized he'd been by the incident. "I'll tell you," Dylan told Hentoff, "I'm never going to have anything to do with any political organization again in my life." He was 23 years old. I'm not revisiting that interesting moment here because it represented a turning point in Dylan's life, even though it did. I'm not here to say I know exactly what Dylan was thinking when he spoke, because I don't. I'm looking at this historical moment because I think that Dylan's remark, his frank comments, came out of a core. That's a word that some young people use today. A core of sentiments and feelings and thoughts about the Kennedy assassination that rarely surface anymore. In fact, that fateful speech may have been the last moment when that core freely expressed itself. Since then, it has been replaced by what has become an orthodoxy about the JFK assassination, a set of widely accepted conspiracy theory arguments and assumptions that we, ironically, see as rebellious radical concepts, even though polls indicate that they are held by most Americans. Here's what happened that night and what Bob Dylan came to think about it. With great fanfare, a group called the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee announced that it would give Dylan and the writer James Baldwin a big award at the Americana Hotel. The Tom Paine Civil Liberties Award, they called it. It was a fundraising event for the civil rights movement. Dylan sympathized and he wanted to help. But as soon as he got there, he started to feel uncomfortable. "First of all, the people with me couldn't get in," Dylan told Hentoff. "They weren't dressed right or something. Inside the ballroom, I got really uptight. I began to drink. I looked down from the platform and saw a bunch of people who had nothing to do with my kind of politics. I got scared." Dylan saw in these people older men and women who had been involved with the left in the 1930s and were now supporting civil rights drives. "That's groovy," he continued. "But now they were a bunch of rich old people in fancy outfits, and it was like they were giving the money out of guilt." So Dylan tried to leave, but the organizers of the event followed him and convinced him to stay. This was understandable. He was a star in their show. So they introduced him and nudged him to the microphone. And upset and scared, Bob Dylan began to speak. Here's some of what he said, which I'm repeating verbatim from a transcription. "I accept this award in behalf of Philip Luce, who led the group to Cuba, which all people should go down to Cuba. I don't see why anybody can't go to Cuba. I don't see what's going to hurt by going anyplace. I don't know what's going to hurt anybody's eyes to see anything. On the other hand, Philip is a friend of mine who went to Cuba. I'll stand up, and to get uncompromisable about it, which I have to be honest, I just gotta be, as I got to admit that the man who shot President Kennedy, Lee Oswald, I don't know exactly what he thought he was doing, but I got to admit honestly that I saw some of myself in him. I don't think it would have gone. I don't think it could go that far. But I got to stand up and say I saw things that he felt in me, not to go that far and shoot. At this point, the shocked audience began to boo Dylan, so he became understandably defensive. "You can boo, but booing's got nothing to do with it," Dylan declared. "I just want to admit that I accept this Tom Paine Award in behalf of James Foreman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and on behalf of the people who went to Cuba." By this point, Dylan could feel the evening's host kicking his legs and nudging him to get away from the microphone. Shortly after that, he fled the event. A year later, you could still see the bitterness in Bob Dylan's interview with Hentoff. "People talk about trying to change society," Dylan declared. "All I know is that so long as people stay so concerned about protecting their status and protecting what they have, ain't nothing going to be done." Dylan's comment was wise. It was also the sort of sweeping observation people make when they want to wash their hands of something. But the big question remained, what was Bob Dylan trying to say when he confessed that he related to Lee Harvey Oswald? I'm going to work on that question in part 2 of this series.